Are you ready?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Parishscope. I'm Pastor Chris Sansom from St. John's Lutheran Church, Sam Prairie.
And I'm Casey Dreamus. I'm the creative worship director at Our Savior Lutheran.
And you better believe I got sound effects. I'm going to use them.
You played that earlier, but I didn't know you were actually going to start the episode with it.
Oh, yeah. Come on. Are you ready? You got to like it. It's just funny.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
I liked it.
I'm glad I got some support. That's what it's really all about. Just me getting support for my toys, my little sound effects and whatever. Oh man. So anyway, we got a normal episode this week, and that's different. We've had two kind of reaction videos and our reaction podcast, I guess I should say. Mm-hmm. And this week we kind of talked about it and said, hey, let's just do kind of a traditional one, a normal one. And you sent me something, and I'm actually gonna talk about this first because it's definitely more of a political thing, I guess I would say.
Yeah, it definitely is.
You sent me a thing about Christian nationalism.
Well, yeah. So the thing with ever since the election, there's a lot of people online who are very adamant about explaining to Christians what Christianity is.
Oh, yes.
And it's always just kind of funny to me because it's very, it's very angry every time. And it's very pointed at, if you believe this, well, what about, Jesus said this, so you're not a real Christian. And it's like, okay, all right. Well, anyway, but yeah, I wondered, I looked at this and I just thought, okay, well, I wonder what your thoughts are, because as we both know, people kind of like to take a verse or even a part of a verse and then use that as like, oh, look, see, like, here's the proof that that's not what Christians do. And then a lot of times it is not the full story. And there's a lot of things that people tend to get wrong when they're just taking a tiny, tiny chunk of the Bible and trying to use a whole argument with that little piece. So I was wondering, what your thoughts would be on this. Do you want me to read it, or do you want to read it?
Well, I got it right in front of me, so I'm perfectly good. It says, so it's kind of putting these things like, in contrast to one another, right? And it's like Christian nationalism says this, and then it says Christ says this, and it's a quote of scripture. Yeah. And so it says Christian nationalism says fight, and then Christ says blessed are the peacemakers. And so that's the very, very first one. Christian nationalism, of course, I'm guessing it's, I'll be honest with you, like, this term has been used a little bit, and I'm still not 100% sure exactly what everybody means by it. I guess it's some form of like patriotic Christianity. Yeah,
I guess so.
Is that what it's supposed to be?
I guess. I mean, because they're not necessarily saying like conservatives. Most of the people I know posting this type of stuff are typically angry at conservatives, but I mean, you can be a Christian and be liberal too. So it's, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so the first one right off the bat, like Christian nationalism says fight. Christ said, blessed are the peacemakers. Now, what they don't tell you is that, first of all, fight is out of context, and you need to add context before you can really make any kind of impression on any of that. And it's not like Christian nationalists, at least the way I see it, they're not exactly like running around fighting constantly, like D'Artagnan from the Three Musketeers. By the way, for those of you that maybe not get that reference, if you ever read the actual book by Alexandre Dumas, like, it starts off with D'Artagnan coming into town, and his dad told him to fight and fight often, and so that's what he's going to do. And then so it's like this is not a movement of D'Artagnans here. You got to kind of put that in context. So I'd be interested to see exactly what they're kind of talking about. But the other part of that is that they're saying blessed are the peacemakers. I'm assuming they're directing us back to the Sermon on the Mount. which is in Matthew 5. Um, and Matthew 5, like, see, that text is a hard one because on the one hand, you know, okay, so yes, Christ did call us to be peacemakers. But at the same time, realize like there's a reason that that text itself is really hard. It also said, "Blessed are the meek, blessed are the hungry, blessed are the poor." Are all the people that are posting this going to then say, "Well, okay, you have to be poor, you have to be hungry,
Yeah.
you have to be all of these things," and part of what that text does is it kind of creates this cycle that creates itself. And what I mean by that is like, so you read through the first, like, say 12 verses, and then all of a sudden Jesus starts talking about salt losing its saltiness. And then, like, after that, you get to some of the hardest law in the scriptures. Where Christ basically says, "Hey, if your eye causes you to stumble, rip your eye out.
Yeah.
If your hand causes you to stumble, cut your hand off." And so the law basically brings you back to go, okay, maybe I'm not all that great. Maybe I am, a poor, miserable sinner. And then all of a sudden you kind of start through the blessed are the meek, blessed are the, the people that are struggling, all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
so again, you're cherry picking a text for your purposes. Now, again, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be peacemakers,
Yeah, of course.
of a sort. Nobody wants to say that, but again, it really does depend on the context in terms of when should you fight and when should you not.
Yeah.
There is a time, even for a Christian, to fight in a sense. However, those instances are not necessarily, I guess, it's not like we run out of the way and go, okay, we're going to fight. But at the same time, like Christian nationalism, it just makes it just seem like people are just fighting constantly. And I just, yeah, the whole sentiment of that one is incorrect.
Well, and that's kind of, that brought a question to my mind was, like, there's been some things recently for me that I've kind of been out. There's been some local political stuff that I've kind of stepped up, and I hate to say stepped up. That makes me sound like I'm praising myself. I'm not praising myself. What I mean is there's some things that I felt like were very wrong that were being said, and I got up and spoke at a council meeting and stuff. And the thing is, that's been something on my mind too, of like, when they say like blessed are the peacemakers, it's like, well, okay, what exactly do you mean by that? Because for me, I feel like there's some people who are really mad at me for speaking up on something I really truly believe in, and so it's like, well, are you saying I'm not a peacemaker then because I upset people, even though I really feel like it was the right thing to do, so it's like that. That's what I kind of wonder, is like, does Jesus have anything about stepping up in like certain moments, or does that make sense, or is that too broad?
No, I get it. I get what you're saying. Honestly, what I would say is reading through the text and really thinking about that and what it means in essence to be a peacemaker as a Christian. I think there is a lot of wisdom in terms of being a peacemaker. And realize Jesus says, like, if somebody slaps you in the cheek, give them your other cheek. So there is a definite thread of heavy duty peace for sure. But in terms of the governing world, the world that has government in it and all this kind of stuff, Paul is very clear that, we are called ultimately to be good citizens of that governing structure. And quite frankly, that's what a board meeting and that's what all these town hall meetings, that's what they're about. They're about you being a good citizen. And, the government gives you a facility and a place. Now, if you got into a fist fight with them and got thrown out, like, that would be a different story.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's one of the things that's, like, really unique about this is, like, we're over here again. You really got to add this into context. I mean, again, let's just put it this way. Again, we're looking at left and right. And yes, in terms of things where I've seen people post stuff like this, it was always people on the left doing it to people on the right. But I mean, again, so here we have a clear instance where people are saying, okay, And they're probably talking about, when Trump got shot in the ear and he got up and said, fight, 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 and they're like, okay, that's
Yeah.
Christian nationalism. But on the same front, right now we have this whole ordeal going on with Ukraine. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people on the left want Ukraine to keep fighting the Russians. And they
Yeah.
want to supply them with more money and funding and all that kind of stuff. Whereas a lot of people on the right are the ones saying, hey, this war needs to end. Too
Yeah.
many people have died. It's a terrible thing. Yes, Ukraine is not going to come out with getting everything back, and that sucks. But
Mm.
we need to stop killing everybody. And so then you go, okay, well, in this instance, who's the one saying fight, 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 and who's the one, you know what I mean? And again, that's not necessarily a knock at them. Everybody has various arguments and things that they're going to think about. But the point of the matter is obviously in both of these scenarios, there are times when people think it is okay to fight and
Yeah.
when you think it shouldn't be happening. And so you got two instances, and both of them are the polar opposite. So I think that the idea of just saying, oh, just fight, fight, fight is a gross overstatement, I guess you might say, and lacks a lot of context, as does the blessed are the peacemakers. The second one, Christian nationalism, says America first, and then Christ says, for God so loved the world. And this is another one where I think like we have a lot of unique anomalies. It's basically, if I was to pull that argument to the extreme, I would never believe it would be ever okay to be patriotic.
Right.
Ultimately that's what that argument is saying. The argument is basically arguing that you can never be patriotic because God loved the world. And since God loved the world, you can never be patriotic and want your country ultimately to succeed, because that means other countries will not succeed in essence. And again, that's just a gross mischaracterization. And even the for God so loved the world part, like, yes, God loved the world by giving his only son, right? John 3:16. And that's what the reference is all about. And so again, somebody who says America first is talking about a political standing that deals with other countries and not so much with whether or not Christ died for the people in the other countries.
Yeah.
And so again, that's an apples and oranges kind of thing.
Yeah.
Christian nationalism, mass deportation, Christ, welcome the stranger. Well, again, this one's, this is, what do they call that? I guess it's kind of a straw man a little bit.
Okay.
I guess and this is the argument, and this is a classic argument for people on the right. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm like reinventing the wheel here, but like,
Yeah.
they'll say like, well, are you allowed to defend your home? If you got your wife and kids in bed and you're going to sleep, do you lock your doors? Do you defend your home? Do you, and it's like, and it's so true. And like, again, even with the mass deportation, I don't think anybody's saying all of these people are bad. Now, again, most of the people that they are trying to deport have broken laws, and not just they came over the border illegally crime, but like they murdered somebody or created, did theft or hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And so most of the deportations that are taking place, at least right now, are very much in line with that. But it all kind of comes back and stems from this whole idea of, the country is our home and we need to protect our home.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I don't know, I just get when they say something like that, like welcome to strangers, and then a lot of times I hear people trying to sort of compare this to some sort of like murder, like we're killing these people. And it's like,
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, yeah, I think a border and having a home, like you said, is definitely something you have to protect, and you have to be, it's not like there aren't anybody there, like nobody's allowed to come into the country. There are definitely people allowed to come into the country. There's people, we're, mostly talking about like Mexico, but there are a lot of people who come over from Mexico legally, and
yes.
they're not being thrown out or threatened to leave or anything like that. And I don't know. I always just have an interest. I feel like I think about this a lot because my mom's side of the family, I'm not very far down the lineage of immigrants. Like they came over relatively recently in history.
Sure.
So I really think about that a lot because it's like I'm very, very grateful to be in this country, but they also came over here legally. And, you know, and I just, you know, they had to do certain things to stay in the country and become citizens and all that.
Yeah.
Um, and I just don't think there's, I mean, I just don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, having a little bit of a vetting process for that. But that's just me. But
Sure.
anyway,
Sure.
not
But
to, not to try to make this political. I would try to keep it on the Christian
no,
side of it. But
yeah, but at the same time, I would say, along with that, and maybe looking at the other side of it, I'm not saying that there's never any room for having somebody that would come here illegally under certain circumstances, but
right,
it also dodges and misses the bigger question, which is to say, what do we as a Christian do? And that's the more interesting question. Again,
mm-hmm.
the government is its own separate entity. The government does not have to be Christian.
Right,
And we don't necessarily want the big America Christian church. That's not
yeah,
what we're after. Paul says that the government carries a sword ultimately for a reason. And so we kind of maintain that and we keep that. The question is, what do you do with what do you do with somebody who's right in front of you and you're a Christian? Now, you might
yeah,
not invite them into your home because you don't trust them and you're scared of them and all that kind of stuff. But maybe there are certain things that we can do to help those people that are in need without ever even asking, are you illegal? Are you not illegal? And maybe the
yeah,
country deports them and maybe they don't. And, whatever. And I think that's one of those things where, like, if you look at Christian churches, by and large, we're making up the heart and soul of soup kitchens and
yeah,
some of these centers that people can go to. We're doing an awful lot of work to help those people in our midst, and never once do we really say, okay, are you illegal? Where's your papers? you know
yeah.
Now, again,
Well,
if the country deports them, it deports them, and we're not going to try to hide them from the country.
yeah. Well, you know, I think about this actually a lot, and I don't know. Some people might call me a hypocrite. I don't know, but I feel like if I found out that my neighbor was here illegally, I don't, I wouldn't, I don't know. I don't have like a feeling of like, oh, I'm going to go report him. You know, I feel like I would still just treat him like any other, you know, as a normal person, and of course, and love him and stuff. But if someone showed up and they got deported, you know, if they don't have the papers to be here and stuff, you know, I just it's interesting because it's like you said, the government's kind of its own thing. I
Yeah.
don't really feel the need to like I need to go out of my way to find somebody who's illegal and like out them. Um, you know, so when they say this, it's kind of like I don't know. I feel like it's a little broad to say,
Hmm.
oh, you know, Christian nationalists saying mass deportation, but I don't think every single person would be like is walking around hunting, looking for illegal immigrants and trying to get them deported. It's like, well, you know, the government's doing it, and I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. It's like you got to let the government do what the government does. And
Yeah,
I mean, as long as the government isn't doing anything that is like strictly anti-Christian, or anti-God, by and large, you can go along with that. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, you gotta be careful because yeah, our job, again, is a citizen, is it our job to hunt down the illegals, people that are here illegally? No, it's not.
yeah,
And honestly, how would you even know if your neighbor was legal unless either A, they told you, or B,
yeah.
you went and asked them, right? Like, are you illegal? You know,
Right.
and that's a weird
Which I have no
conversation.
desire to do, but yeah. Well, yeah. I just it's an interesting thing because I feel like, you know, especially like someone who posts this, it's like, oh, you guys, you're so evil because you support mass deportation. And it's the same thing as I just don't think people they quite understand that Christians may not support something, but it doesn't mean they're going to be like horrible to people. You know, it's like if I met anybody with a conflicting viewpoint, I'm still going to be nice to them.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I think like, hey, I think your lifestyle's great. I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to be nice to you. Like I'm going to, you know, treat you with respect and everything. And there's just a weird thing I feel like right now where there's people who cannot comprehend how you cannot like be supportive of a lifestyle or whatever it is, but you could still be a nice person to them.
Yeah.
Like they like
And
can't
I agree.
connect
I
that.
think that's a huge conflict right now in our society, that they
But I
can't quite separate those two.
but I feel like that's definitely that's you tell me if I'm getting off on like a tangent and I'm not I don't know enough, but like it I feel like that really is to its core kind of the Christ, that's his message. It's like you should be good to people. You don't necessarily tell them they're right if they're living a bad life. I mean, you're supposed to repent and walk away from, a bad life, but or from, doing bad things, sinful things, but it doesn't mean you're not still going to be loved, or,
Yeah.
God's still going to love you, but he's not saying it's okay for you to do those things.
But again, this actually gets to the heart and soul of the story of the Good Samaritan, right?
Yeah.
Like the man is beaten and, left for dead in essence. And part of the mode of the story is that he is left half naked. Now part of the imagery there, and while we are kind of like, what? He's half naked, but part of the imagery there is that the three people that come by, they can't tell who he is. Remember,
Mm,
he's half dead. They don't know if he's Jew. They don't know if he's a Gentile. They don't know anything.
yeah.
All they know is that you have a man that's stripped down to nothing. See, a lot of times you'd wear clothes to identify who you were
Yeah.
in terms of culture and yada yada yada. So the fact that he's been stripped down naked and he's half dead, it actually says a lot in terms of like, okay, are you going to help somebody that you know nothing about? And again, we're kind of given that same choice. When
Hmm.
it comes to, people of immigration, you know, are you more concerned about the person's well-being or their immigration status? And I would say as a Christian, we are certainly called as individuals to be more concerned about um the well-being of the person. But
Hmm.
that being said, that doesn't mean that we're like anti-deportation, because that's the
Yeah.
government doing what the government does. And to be honest, even as citizens, we can actually vote for that with good conscience and feel comfortable knowing that that person, that government is ultimately trying to keep us safe, if
Yeah.
that's what you feel keeps you safe. And
Hmm.
again, maybe other people won't feel that way. Maybe they think other things will help keep them safe. But then I'm not going to. And again, that's where you get into the politics of like, okay, who's right and who's wrong. And it's like, well, we're not going to get into any of that. We're just going to say the government has an absolute right to deport people that are here illegally, just as much
Yeah.
as Christians. We have a calling as Christians to help those people that are in front of us, regardless of who they are or where
Yeah.
they are. And in fact, this actually brings us to kind of a side topic a little bit. Some of you guys may have seen the news, but there's a couple actual Lutheran organizations that
Yeah.
got embroiled up in this, and like,
Oh.
yeah, even Doge, Elon Musk said some stuff. Um, Basically said that they might have been like funneling money, and honestly, I haven't investigated a whole lot. The president of our Senate actually sent out this big old long letter, though. Basically,
Oh yeah.
the yeah, the letter states that we actually broke fellowship with this organization. So,
Oh
you
wow.
know, and yeah, and I mean it's one of those things where, Lutheran is such a specific term that, everybody kind of gets wrapped up in everything. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where, and I mean honestly, it's one of those things where to me, if this Lutheran organization is doing what it was accused of, then it needs to stop and repent. If it was not doing those things, then hopefully the truth comes out and their name is cleared.
Yeah. Now,
So,
when he sends something out like that, is that like a public thing? Like it's just like posted online, or is that specifically to like pastors or?
usually, the emails that are in their system. So most pastors and secretaries and churches will get an email, and then also it'll be posted on Facebook and the like.
Oh, okay. I just wondered. That's because that's interesting. I haven't heard anything about that, but I do find that very interesting to sort of like just in a moment like that to maybe teach a little bit about like yeah, why maybe if I don't know how in detailed he got about the reasoning why you broke fellowship, or we broke fellowship with him. But that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's one of those things where, like, with a lot of these organizations, um, it was more about like stocking the food pantry, and so it's like,
Yeah.
okay, even if we disagree with somebody, we can stock a food pantry. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, but increasingly, as the political climate has shifted, you have the one liberal side with the ELCA, which is pro-abortion, pro-homosexuality, pro-transgender, all this stuff. And what they've done is increasingly that stuff has been laced, with this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if
So
you know what go ahead.
yeah. Oh, well, you said, is this the ELCA who's being?
Yeah, because again, it
Okay.
was kind of a pan Lutheran thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's interesting because there's a church in Washington, not the one I'm at, but there's a church in Washington that was ELCA, and they broke away from the ELCA.
yeah,
But from my understanding, they broke off into another synod that is even more sort of. I mean, we're not, I say liberal, but liberal in the church sense of,
sure,
being more
sure,
like accepting a female pastor, or like some of the things that we don't do,
yeah.
and yeah, all that stuff. So but that's just interesting because there's one I know right here in town that there's a whole controversy about that. So that's interesting.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what synod they broke off into, because, like, there's been
Yeah.
several of them. Every time the ELC seems to go one step further, some branch breaks off of them.
Oh,
And
really?
so,
See,
oh
that's
yeah,
interesting because my understanding was that uh, it was almost like they wanted to, like ELCA wasn't liberal enough for them, but
I mean, again, that might be, but at the same time, I don't know what you could be more
yeah,
liberal with, like just
well,
knowing them.
yeah, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to
I'm sure it's possible. I honestly, it's just hard to fathom.
yeah,
But yes, it's a lot of that stuff that gets somehow laced with it, where it's not just about buying food for poor people, but it's about buying food for poor transgenders, and they have to be transgender, and all of a sudden you're like, well, no, we're
hmm,
not going to do that. um
yeah,
and it's unfortunate, but that's kind of how those things tend to go. um
yeah,
and again, well, look, it's just like this. We used to have this Lutheran World like mission and relief that we were all part of, and they wanted to send a bunch of, like, again, like homosexual pastors into the mission field, and they're like, okay, well, we can't support that. It's like
yeah,
we can kind of like take a lot, but that's one or two steps too far.
yeah,
Um and unfortunately, that's forced a lot of us, a lot of the, like, the LCMS, to kind of create their own things. And
yeah,
unfortunately, their own things are never quite as big or good as the other ones in terms of overall organization and money. So
yeah. Well, that's interesting. I'm trying to I'm actually trying to find I'm on their website right now. I'm trying, this is the beauty of doing remote, you know. We have but I can't even find, I'm looking at their about us page, their history page. I can't find anything that says what synod they are. So that's
yeah,
interesting. So that's kind of a strange. Most churches, like I think, are pretty blatantly just put right on the front, like Missouri Synod, like right there.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Huh.
Uh, yep. So
Any
there you
whoozle
go.
bees. The last one, do we want the very last thing they posted was which I think is really kind of just the same thing as America First, but they put US as in U period S period,
Yeah,
and then Christ says us,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah,
I mean
yeah.
kind of the same thing as that. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, it kind of is, and it's a misuse of theology, in my opinion.
Well, I
Um,
feel like us had to be a part of a sentence at some point.
I'll be frank, I don't know exactly which verse that's pointing
I
to.
mean, yeah,
I'd want to see their notes.
I would think he said that word, or at least the the Hebrew version of that word at least a few times in different stories or different things. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. So
but
anyway,
yeah,
so
so
yes,
there's
that was
that.
the last one. There you
Hmm.
go. Christian,
Now,
good old Christian nationalism, whatever in the
yeah.
world that is.
Now we are we moving on to the video you sent me before, or are
Yeah,
we?
we can. Yeah, absolutely. So I did. So earlier this week, and it's just great because like, throughout the week, I'll send you stuff and I'll try to get,
Yeah,
what do you think of this? And I'll be honest. So like I really liked the video because it kind of put into words a way that I was thinking, and I sent it to you and I said, this actually puts it really well. And you kind of got back to me. You said, no, that's not the way I understood it. And I was like, oh, now we got to talk about it.
yeah.
Um, so
Do
so
you,
the video, and I'll just explain it. I'm not gonna like
okay,
play it or
yeah, I know.
anything. The guy was basically talking about, one of the problems with, like, say, dare I say, the mega church or non-denom church is that actually what he was talking about in literal terms is the sacramentarians, those people that have gotten rid of the sacraments.
Oh
And
yeah.
he was basically saying, hey, look, they're getting sacraments, they're misplacing them. And
Hmm.
so, they got rid of the sacrament of the altar, and now all of a sudden they're worshiping, like, the, dare I say, the praise band leader or the
Yeah.
pastor. And then, one of the things that he brought in was, like, in a very liturgical or conservative church, or a sacrament centered church, the pastors come and go. But in the big churches, a lot of times those are, I guess I should say, the sacramentarian churches, a lot of times the pastor leaving is like the big heavy blow that takes them out,
Right.
because they're in essence they're worshiping the wrong things, is kind of, I think, what he was kind of saying. And while I don't know if I would have taken it to that extreme of, like, oh, they're worshiping the pastor, I did see a lot of that was like, okay, this is kind of the way I view things a little bit. Maybe not worshiping, but
Hmm.
certainly putting him on a really high pedestal. Um, but then you said, no, that's not really how I see it. So I was kind of saying, okay, now I want to hear the way you kind of thought of it.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to make sure I remember exactly what he said because I mean, let's see. Like I understand what he means because I think it really like especially me being someone who grew up in a non-denominational church. Um, there are definitely churches out there like we both have listened to the whole rise and fall of Mars Hill
Oh yeah.
with Mark Driscoll, and like that definitely, I mean, that whole church fell apart when he left, like completely.
Yep.
And so that there's definitely those instances. I mean, you think of like Joel Osteen's church, and the funny part is I don't even know what the name of his church is. I just know it's the Joel Osteen church, um and like I mean literally, there are definitely those type of churches, and probably when you start getting to the mega church thing, especially if it was built on one person like Mars Hill
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
for sure, like, yeah, that's probably true in those senses. But like for me, growing up in a smaller non-denominational church, we definitely didn't view it as like, oh, this is so and so's church, like the pastor's church.
Yeah.
I never really viewed it that way, and I don't think we were ever really encouraged to view it that way. And again, I grew up in a church that was like our tradition was not having traditions, like we never
Sure.
celebrate anything. And so like especially when Transfiguration Sunday, it's like, whoa, what is this? We never really we never really had anything like that. But I'm trying to remember everything he said because it just some of it I think is a little like I definitely can see why they would say that. But let's see. Oh, one of the things he talked about was experience. Like they always experience God through music.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. He did. He talked
and
about that.
I mean, we had a pretty strong like group of musicians at my old church or my church growing up, but I don't ever recall like a discussion of like, oh, feeling God through the music. I mean, I always thought of it more as like we as a congregation are trying to praise God. It wasn't, to me it wasn't. I do see there's churches like that where it's like people are like, oh, feel him in the room right now,
Yeah.
feel him, he's coming in. And but at least for us, I never was taught that. It was always like we're sitting here singing these songs because we're praising God. We're saying like, we're showing our appreciation to God. We're thanking God, all that all into one big thing. But it was never like, all right, I'm here to feel God right now through the music.
Yeah.
That
So
was,
so I got a question for you on that front. Like, so
yeah,
in this church that you were in, growing up and what have you, did a lot of people like raise their hands up and stuff?
not, I mean, when I say raise hands, it's like palms facing up and about to your shoulder.
Uh-huh.
That's the most I really ever saw. A few of those people. One of those was my mother, but
Sure.
not a lot of people really were super animated.
And
Like,
so then the question is like, so for those people, why would they raise their hands?
I think like I've asked my mom that before, and
Yeah.
she just I don't know. She doesn't. It's never really been like I just feel God better that way. It's just I think it's more and I would hate to say because it's not a meditation, so to say, but it's like there's just something I don't know. For my mom, I know it's just something like she just it feels right to do that. And I know that that can be taken as like, well, you're trying to feel God's emotion, but I don't really think it's ever been like I'm trying to. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there is a bit of like it's trying to feel like you're connecting to God, but
Yeah.
again,
So
I
so
it
I've
was never
watched
said. Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
So I was gonna say I've watched some videos of people trying to explain it, and of the videos I've watched. Now, again, I mean, how many videos could I watch? Like, two or three, so we're not
Yeah.
talking like I did a full survey of all non-denoms, like I'm not saying
Right.
that,
Right.
but of the few videos that I've seen, almost all the people that raise their hands tend to look at it as they're experiencing God. And so they want to lift their hands to get just a little bit closer.
Right.
and
Right.
and so that's kind of been the and so that's part of the reason I think that the video that I sent kind of resonated with me. I was kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is what's going on, at least the way I take it. But again, so that's why I was really interested to kind of hear your response,
Yeah.
um
Well,
because
and
you
I'm
did not take it that way.
yeah, I mean, I think well, I just thought it's the way he said it in the video was very much like this is what all non-denominational like that style of church does. And it's like, well, I'm sure there definitely are for sure. But
Sure.
that it's kind of the same way I look at when people say, well, Catholics, they just do confessional so they can go do whatever they want throughout the week. And then they just go and confess and they don't care. It's like, well, that's a pretty big generalization,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there are definitely people who probably do kind of view it that way,
Oh,
but
for sure.
but that's not really the purpose of it, and there are people who I would have to believe there are people who actually take it seriously, you know. Um,
Oh, for sure there are.
and so that's kind of when he was saying it that way, it was kind of like, well, I'm not denying that there are definitely some people out there who probably do that, or there are churches that do that. But I think it's a little bit of a generalization, kind of like the Catholic confessional thing. You know what I mean? It's like not
Yeah.
all non-denominational churches are like that. And but I also we also talked about how they were saying, um, it's not these churches are based on one person, like just the pastor. And I was saying it's interesting hearing that because right now with our Savior, we're still looking for a pastor, and it's been a few years now, and there's a lot of discussion of like, well, once we get a pastor, then we can take that next step, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting because in a way it's like, well, and when you're deprived of a leader for 4 years or whatever, it's completely understandable why you're like really want somebody here, because I even have
Yeah.
a hard time telling people like, hey, come to our church, because it's like, well, we don't really have like a main pastor right now. It's kind of weird
Yeah.
to be like, yeah, come to our church. It's like we're still waiting, like,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but so in a way it's like it's almost like we're kind of waiting so we can have that person, you know so I feel like in a way we're almost a little guilty of that, if you want to call it guilty, but
Well, I think
you
I
know
think anytime you have somebody who's like a truly dynamic, individual,
oh yeah,
regardless of which church body they're in, as a pastor, you're gonna have people that kind of, dare I say, follow that person. Um,
yeah,
and and
it's
and you're gonna experience that. Yeah.
yeah, it's I mean, you know, we there was a youth minister in Washington when I was growing up, and he was great. He was an amazing preacher. He was a wonderful guy and had a great family. Great, his wife was a wonderful person, and I tell you what, there was like five different kids who were like, "I'm going into ministry because of this guy,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some of them followed through. Some of them got into it and realized this is definitely not what they should be doing. Um, but the thing, like once he left, that was a big hole, and it's not
Yeah.
because they promote like we're only going to we're going to worship this guy. It's just that he was
Yeah.
so good, and he had such a relationship with everybody that when he left, it was really hard. And even I'll say the guy who replaced him was actually really, really good. And so, uh, he was great too, but there were still a lot of people who were like, well, it's not the other guy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're just going to have that, unfortunately. And I've played for a few churches that had really funny like pastors who were just really like, I mean, it was hard not to be captivated by them. And you just know if they end up leaving, it's big shoes to fill, it's hard to,
Yeah.
because there's just that comparison all the time. You can't help it. Um,
Yeah.
so
And again, I think you're right. I think every church body can be at least a little bit guilty of that. I will say though, especially in terms of the mega church and not so much,
yeah,
I mean, yes, there tend to be a lot more non-denom mega churches out there. So in that regard, they do kind of get all lumped together. But I would say in that arena, I know a lot of it has to do with branding. It has to do
oh
with the
yeah,
dynamic speech of a pastor. And again, there are some Lutheran churches that get kind of caught up in this as well, even good LCMS churches. Um, I'm not going to name names, but
yeah,
anyway, there are some of them that really get caught up into this, and it really does become about marketing and branding, and it becomes all about like who their dynamic speaker is and yada yada yada.
yeah,
And so again, there is kind of an element of that it's easy to get caught up in.
yeah.
I will say that non-denoms tend to do it more. I doubt they view it as a sacrament.
I think you mean better. No, I'm just kidding. uh, no, there's a compilation someone made of, it said something about how, like all these accusations of being branding and, like it was just like this kind of, I don't know, it was something about how, it's not branding and people are accusing these churches of it all being like fabricated. And then they made a compilation of like all these mega churches, and it's like the pastors or the youth ministers being like, "What up, fam? This week's Easter, and we're gonna
Yeah.
all." They keep doing all this stuff, and then it cuts to another one, and they say word for word the exact same thing, and then they cut to another one, and they say word for word the exact
Oh
same
my
thing,
goodness
and
gracious.
I mean, they went through probably like 12 different mega churches, and they're all like, I don't know if they get sent a script. It was eerie. It was like,
Yeah.
how do you're all using the exact same like lingo, like the same kind of, like the 35-year-old guy who's still a youth minister who is like trying to say like slay, like whatever the kids are
Yeah.
saying at
Yeah.
the church.
Right.
And it was unbelievable. I mean, it was really crazy to see that. And that definitely goes on. I mean, for sure.
Yeah. Oh,
I
for
think
sure it does.
I just grew up in a small enough church that we just in a church that was like never ever going to try to market or brand anything.
Yeah.
But what's odd to me is that there's a church in town. I went there. I've gone there to a service before because I used to go to some youth group stuff with some of those kids, and I guess that church must have shut down in the time I was in Pekin, and they're reopening. And we had some like high school kids knock on our door the other day, and they gave us a a handout that was like, "Oh, we're launching, like opening up this Sunday. We'd love for you to come." And the thing I just find that's just so kind of strange to me. The like I don't know, the advertisement aspect of it.
Hmm.
It's like it's almost like someone bought a church and like, all right, so we're going to get everything printed up. We're going to go around and like hand stuff out. We're going to do this and that. And I feel like that's almost like it's like a band printing out their business cards before they've actually like practiced, you know.
Yeah.
It seems to me, you know. And I understand if you're buying a building, but it's like there's a few churches here in town who they started out like doing services in like a basement or like it like
Hmm.
renting out like a school gym, and then they grew and grew until they like bought a building, you know. It's weird for me for it to be the other way around to me, is like buy a building and then like market, you know.
Well, you might be surprised if it might be the members of the old church that have basically just they closed down and then they kind of
Yeah.
revamp things and now they're kind of starting back, which is
Yeah,
the
it's
way
possible.
some of these non-denominational churches have done. Um,
Yeah.
and they've kind of, like I said, they kind of take it down and revamp it and then kind of resend it. I mean, I think of like even like here in Pekin we have the First Nazarene Church, which is by far one of the biggest churches, but then we
Yeah.
have Bridgeway. Well, Bridgeway is actually a First Nazarene church that was
Oh,
kind
really?
of yeah. So it's a branch of the First Nazarene, and what they did is they kind of tried to revamp themselves.
Yeah.
And so even though they have a First Nazarene right down the road, there's most people go to Bridgeway, and some people know that that's a First Nazarene church. A lot of people don't, um, because they kind of
Mhm.
remarketed themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
It's
um,
interesting.
yeah, it is. It is. I will say this though, in terms of the sacraments versus sacramentarians, I will say that I've noticed that in the churches that do not have sacraments, that it's almost like they create their own in a sense. Now, it might not be
Yeah.
as silly as like the pastor, but like I think it's funny that like they won't do baptisms for infants, but they'll do baby dedications. You
Yeah.
know, it's almost like they still need something, and they might not do Holy Communion per se, but they usually do try to find some way of crafting or creating some form of experiential environment.
Oh,
Um,
see, I didn't really catch that. Are some of these churches not doing any communion?
a lot of them are doing communion, but since communion is just a remembrance, it's all symbolic.
Yeah.
And so there's
Okay.
no actual coming into contact with God. And so,
Hmm.
and again, what I've seen with some of these non-denominational churches is they will find other ways to try to come into contact with God. Now, maybe it's playing a video and having everybody close their eyes and just envisioning things, or maybe they get out the fog machines and the lasers because they want
Oh,
to,
yeah.
create some crazy environment. So who knows how they do it? But again, it's one of those things where it's like you can tell the people are craving that experiential element, and and again, it's one of those things that happens, I've noticed, whenever you don't have the sacraments. Now again, just like
Yeah.
all the other things we've been talking about, there's some Lutheran churches, even LCMS churches, that are guilty of doing the same thing.
Hmm.
um and I also think, and again, I've talked to you at least about this, but I think sometimes, as Lutherans, we to a degree almost overreacted in terms of some of the Catholic stuff. And here's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Um, here's what I mean by that. Like, there's been, obviously Catholic theology is bad. I have a huge disagreement with it. Um,
Hmm.
but there was a lot of traditions that we got rid of, not because they were bad traditions, but because they just seemed too Catholic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the one I always talk about is usually incense, because here you got incense all over the Bible. It's in the original temple. It's in the tabernacle. God says that your prayers are like an incense, a sweet smell in my nose. And then we did away with incense because we're like, oh, that's too Catholic. We don't want that. It's like, well,
Yeah.
no, incense is actually really good. Now, some people are allergic to it, so obviously we got to be careful. But at the same time, it's like, well, let's not just rush out to get rid of that right away. You know?
Yeah. Someone's like, it smells like a college dorm room in here. What's going on? I'm just
Yeah. What are you guys really up to, huh?
kidding. Hmm. There's a sorry, I can't think. There's a grilled cheese food truck out back. What's going on around
Yeah, leave it to the Lutherans. Bringing it back. Bringing it back.
Yeah, yeah. That
So,
that would be a funny. We should do an episode on. You'll probably have to take actually like sit down and like write out all this, but like a episode about all the Catholic traditions that we totally could do that are totally fine. That
oh,
maybe we
sure.
don't do confessional, but like is that really like like that's another question. Like, can we do confessional? I don't know. Like, is that
Yes.
something that really isn't that bad?
Yeah.
But maybe we should just do a whole thing. The Lutheran versus the Catholic tradition mindset or something.
Yeah, fair
Working
enough.
title.
Yeah, that's right. Working title. We're working on it.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Now,
So yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, because I was trying to figure out. So that church, they are actually ELCA. They were before. I looked up because they broke apart, and the other church found a new location, which was at a old Methodist church now. But they were LCMC, Lutheran
Yeah.
Congregation
Yeah.
in Mission
Yeah.
for
Yeah. Yeah.
Christ. So
Yeah.
is
So
that less liberal than the ELCA?
yeah, the LCMC
Okay.
broke off. Originally they broke off with the homosexual stuff. I don't know if they've kept
Oh,
that up or not,
well, it
but
looks like after this whole thing, they broke off just in time. So
well, fair enough.
I was just joking. Sorry.
But anyway, yeah, the LCMC formed, I think, shortly after that. But yeah, it was basically like the ELCA light. So
Oh yeah, ELCA Light,
yeah,
Bud
sort of.
Light, ELCA Light. It would be funny if they just called themselves ELCA Light
Oh
or like
yeah. What I always love
ELCA Zero.
what I always love is like when you're driving down the street or something, and you see a sign for a church, and like the sign, the name of the church tells you like all the fights that they've ever been in. Like, the Free Will Non-Sacramentarian Baptist Second Reformed, not like St. Mary's up the road Baptist Church. you know
Of
and you're
Pekin.
of Pekin. You're just going, where, like, I could tell you every fight that group had. Like,
Yeah, that's funny. See, that's so funny because I would never even really think about that. That's hilarious that you noticed that because I wouldn't. Oh, that's funny.
oh, there's one in Missouri that, and I think it really is like the Free Will Second Reformed, yada yada. It's like a paragraph long, this
Yeah.
church name is. And I met a member of the church once, and I was like, how in the world did you get that name? And they're like, well, we've just always had it. And I'm like, you guys fought with some other churches, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, I think in our history. And I was like, yeah, you did. It's like it
Well,
might have been
someday,
50 years ago, but you guys fought.
well, when they finally come around to the times, they'll just rename themselves like Grace. Yeah, they'll cut all that off.
Yeah. It's just it's extra baggage. That's
Yeah.
what that is.
My aunt went to a church that was named Faith. That was it. Faith. Yeah. The one word names always cracked me up because there was a period of time where they were like one word band names are very in right now. Yeah. And so it makes me think like, oh, there's like churches going around being like, hey, you just got to get a one name church,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh man.
Pretty interesting though.
Oh, it is. Absolutely. Oh man. Well, is it time?
I think it's time
Yeah,
for
for church chatter.
chatter.
We'll get it one day. This whole
It sounds
thing.
right to me. It's so funny. Every time it sounds good to me. Maybe I should just start and you should jump in and then like
Yeah, we need to figure this out.
Maybe it'll be better for the recording. I don't know.
Maybe so. Maybe so. Oh man. Yeah. So anyway, so again, thinking about church, Lent is upon us almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's almost here.
it's almost here. So this coming Wednesday, tomorrow for me, Boy, we're gonna have some stuff for confirmation kids. I'm gonna burn the palm branches
Yeah.
as we make the ashes for Ash Wednesday, which is on March 5th. And that is going to set us off on this Wednesday evening stuff. 5:30 services on Wednesday, and basically we're gonna go into Holy Week. We are doing a Seder meal again this year, so always a good time. Um, it's funny because it's super late this year, and so Easter is not till like April 20th. Um, but still, so those are some of the things that we're kind of looking forward to. Obviously, we're going to have our big meal after Ash Wednesday, but all the meals have been pretty much lined up for after all of our meals. So after our 5:30 meal, our 5:30 service, we will have a meal afterward. And then, of course, I have to go quick because I'll have confirmation, but that's
Oh
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, buddy.
That's exciting.
It
That's all
is.
good.
It is.
Yeah, that's I'm right now. That's kind of what I'm getting geared up for Lent and Easter. So that's just kind of what I'm preparing for right now.
Oh, right
Gotta
on.
gotta gotta bust out all the Easter songs.
That's right, you do.
Yeah,
Remember, you're going to put those hallelujahs away, though. Don't forget about that.
that's right. I know, and I was just thinking about that today. Like, all right, I need to see if I have any on our list right now with Hallelujahs. Uh, I need to put like a little asterisk next to any of them with Hallelujahs. Like, oh, don't
Yeah.
use that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, this is one of those things, fun tidbits of history. And I think I've told you this before, but now I'm getting to the point where I can't remember what I've told you. So,
Yeah.
but
No, go
the
ahead though. It's a
the
good
the
refresher.
the getting rid of hallelujahs, we always do it for all of Lent, but that's actually inaccurate. You're only supposed to do it during Holy Week. Um, the reason that it changed was because we no longer have service every day. See, it
Oh,
used to be
gotcha.
that you had service every single day, and
Mm-hmm.
then what would happen is Sundays were considered mini Easters. And so,
Hmm.
for instance, if you fasted during Lent, you would fast during the week, but then Sundays were a little mini Easter. And so, mini Easter, you can always say Hallelujah, right? Like,
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And so, what would happen is then when you'd get to Holy Week, now all of a sudden, okay, all the Hallelujahs go away because we're talking about the physical pain and death and suffering of Christ, and then ultimately, his death and time in the tomb. And so all the Hallelujahs go away. Well, then they were
Yeah.
supposed to be brought back on Easter morning. But again, all of this is assuming that you are going to church
Every day. Yeah.
every day. And since we don't go to church every day, we go to church every once a week. Well, they had to find some way to make it to where everybody noticed that the Hallelujahs were gone. So
Yeah.
now we just do it all the Sundays. It's like, well, this is kind of backwards. So anyway,
Yeah. But well, yeah. So that works. But yeah, I am trying to be very self conscious of that.
yeah, your church will thank you.
Yeah. Well, we'll see if anybody notices.
We'll see if anybody notices. There you go. Oh man. Well, all right. I think, and unless you have anything else, I think that's all that
No, I
we
think
have
that's it.
time for tonight. So, yeah, thanks everybody for listening. I know I checked our analytics not too long ago. We do have a few listeners, so thank you everybody that's listening. I didn't check them all. I think we had like 20 listeners on Apple. So
Hey.
yeah, I'm working on getting us back on YouTube. We actually got knocked off of
Oh,
Google for a while. So I'm getting us back on YouTube. We're always in the church app, the Sand Prairie Church app. So,
yeah.
but yeah, I was checking the analytics. We had like 20 listens on Apple. So yeah,
Wow.
so right on.
Doing pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. God's blessings to all of you. Bye.
Bye.